Planet America's fake news.
What the hell is going on here?
Hello there, welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Ciadello.
This week, Robert Mueller submits his report on Russian interference in the 2016 election, and the president could not be happier.
And after 3 years of lies and smears and slander, the Russia hoax is finally dead.
We'll look at what we know, what we don't know, and ask, is this all over?
We don't exactly know what happened with collusion, but on obstruction, Mueller expressly says, I am not exculpating the president.
Democrats are still demanding the full report, but also seem pretty happy to change the subject back to healthcare.
And then I'll change the subject back to the economy, where the news isn't quite so good. But first, news that is good if you're Donald Trump.
And first this week,
The Mueller report was great. It could not have been better.
Attorney General Bill Barr's 4-page letter to Congress summarising the findings of Robert Mueller's report exceeding 300 pages included this crucial quote. The investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. Bill Barr's letter confirmed Mueller's report does not recommend any further indictments and that there are no sealed indictments that are yet to be made public. That means a total of 34 people and 3 companies were indicted by Robert Mueller. Among them, 6 former Trump advisors, 5 of whom have pleaded guilty. Foreign Policy Advisor George Papadopoulos, who lied to the FBI and served 14 days in jail. Former campaign chairman Paul Manafort, indicted on 25 counts, convicted of multiple financial crimes, most relating to his work for Ukrainian politicians. He has been jailed for 7.5 years. Campaign aide Rick Gates, who testified against his former business partner Manafort, he also pleaded guilty to lying and conspiracy charges. Former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn admitted to lying to the FBI. Former Trump attorney Michael Cohen admitted to tax and bank fraud, campaign finance violations, and lying to Congress. He's going to jail for 3.5 years. Still awaiting trial is former Trump campaign manager Roger Stone, accused of lying to Congress about his contacts with WikiLeaks and witness tampering. Also indicted, 26 Russian nationals, including 12 GRU intelligence officers and 3 Russian companies. But, crucially, Mueller found nothing to prove a connection between those Trump associates and those Russians. And now, President Trump is alleging a conspiracy of his own against him.
I think it went very high up. I think what happened is a disgrace. I don't believe our country should allow this ever to happen again. This will never happen again. We cannot let it ever happen again. It went very high up and it started fairly low, but with instructions from the high up. This should never happen to a president again.
Yeah, no further indictments, as you say, John, and some people found that a little difficult to process.
ABC News citing sources familiar with the investigation reporting that no more indictments are coming from the special counsel.
Indictments?
Indictments.
Poor Micah. Now, look, we should emphasise that this doesn't mean that Trump won't get nailed by some of the other investigations going on, like his inauguration committee, his hush money payments, his taxes, his financial dealings, his foundation, his gifts, his campaign contributions, his security clearances, and his potential abuses of power. But 2 years ago, people weren't freaking out about the president overestimating the value of his property when applying for a loan. They were worried that he was a puppet, that he was a Manchurian candidate, and that he was an actual Russian agent. In fact, congressmen were still saying that this year.
You believe the president right now has been an agent of the Russians?
Yes, I think there's more evidence than he is. Yes.
An agent like in the 1940s where we had people who are Reds, to use an old term, like that. In other words, working for a foreign power.
He's working on behalf of the Russians, yeah.
That was the number one question. That was why there was a special counsel. Is the president in bed with Russia? And now we know that while Mueller may have found some evidence of conspiracy, he definitely did not find enough to make a case. And if you believe in due process, that makes Trump not guilty. And we move on. and we don't say things like, undoubtedly there was collusion, like Adam Schiff just did. Schiff! By the way, if in a few months' time some more stories come to light, and they will, let's not start saying if Mueller had known this, things would be different. Because do you remember this picture that's done the rounds the last year or so? Well, it was right. Mueller issued more than 2,800 subpoenas. He executed nearly 500 search warrants and interviewed about 500 witnesses. And yet, he still said no conspiracy. So I'm sorry, Democrats, that train has left the station. Legally, it's done.
Well, one thing that it seems that Mueller is in absolutely no doubt about, the extent of the Russian operation to interfere with the 2016 US election. There is nothing especially new in Barr's letter that adds to what we knew from the Russian and Roger Stone indictments. Well, we'll have to wait for the full Mueller report and, as well, potentially crucially, a counterintelligence report, which is on its way, to see what else may have been uncovered on that front along the way, Chaz.
Yeah, what this does mean, though, is that, at least according to Barr's memo, the Russians' electoral meddling was restricted to messing around on social media and stealing some emails and leaking them, which means that the media rhetoric about Russians hacking the election, or this being the worst attack on America since 9/11, or this being our Pearl Harbor, or Russia literally electing Trump, was all well over the top. And I think it's important to point that out because as of November 2018, when asked whether Russia tampered with actual vote tallies in the election, 67% of Democrats said that was probably or definitely true. No, it was not true. That conspiracy theory needs to end. And one more thing that this shows is that, no, this was not a waste of time and money. First, money. Mueller's probe is projected to cost between $32 and $35 million. And so far, it's estimated to have collected $28 million. But with the likelihood of netting up to $42 or $46 million after all of Manafort's many properties are sold. So it made money. And as for wasting time, this probe has hopefully confirmed exactly what Russia did and didn't do when they tried to interfere with the election. And in my book, that is time well spent.
Yeah, good for the economy, Chaz. But most ambiguous probably of all was Mueller's decision not to make what Barr describes as a traditional prosecutorial judgment when it comes to the question of obstruction of justice. But also that, quoting Mueller, Barr makes it very clear that while this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime of obstruction, it does not exonerate him either. Happily, though, for President Trump, Bill Barr and his deputy Rod Rosenstein did decide to exonerate the president of obstruction due to, they say, insufficient evidence.
Yeah, and on that question, John, in the letter, Barr said that to charge Trump, the government would need to prove that Trump obstructed with sufficient nexus or connection to a pending contemplated proceeding. And in this case, there were no actions that had a connection to a contemplated proceeding. So you need to think you may have committed a crime to have a cover-up for that crime.
No cover-up without a crime.
Exactly, which means as soon as Mueller said there was no conspiracy, then the evidence of obstruction became irrelevant. It didn't matter what that evidence was because Barr is saying if there's no conspiracy, there is no obstruction, full stop. By the way, I know a lot of legal writers disagree with that legal interpretation, but bottom line, Barr's the Attorney General. It's his job to make narrow legalistic calls if he wants to, just like it was the Department of Justice's job to make narrow legalistic calls about not charging Hillary for mishandling classified information. Now, I know some were worried that Mueller worked for 22 months on these questions, whereas Barr made up his mind in only 2 days. But Mueller actually told Barr 3 weeks ago about his findings, so Barr has had a while to think about things. Bottom line, because of Barr's interpretation of obstruction, legally, this is done as well. It's finished. Politically, though, it might not be, because who knows what evidence of obstruction is actually in Mueller's report. Well, according to Barr, we know, because most of it has been publicly reported already. But still, we'll know soon for sure, because the Justice Department have said it'll have its own summary to send Congress within weeks. Hang on, a summary? Does that mean we're not going to see the report, even in redacted form? That would be a controversial call, given that a Quinnipiac poll this week found 84% of people said that Mueller's report should be made public. One more thing. Remember 2 years ago, the FBI started that counterintelligence probe you referred to, which wasn't just about charging people or about collusion. It was about exploring whether Trump might have unwittingly fallen under Moscow's influence. It would cover everything to do with Trump and Russia. And Mueller took over that inquiry when he was appointed special counsel. Well, in a month or two, the leaders of the House and Senate are going to be briefed on the findings of that much broader inquiry. So, one way or another, what Mueller found out is very likely going to be made public.
It's a money spinner. I remember the Star Report 20 years ago. It was a book. It was a bestseller. Everybody bought it. Now, we'll get a legal opinion from a former Deputy Attorney General of the United States in just a moment. But first, a reminder for you of the long and rather dramatic story so far. At times, it felt like an old Cold War political thriller playing out in real time.
Why is all of this being done? What have they built you to do?
A Russian plot to help bring a controversial candidate to power.
And I have here a list of the names of 207 persons who are known by the Secretary of Defense as being members of the Communist Party.
We all saw it unfolding in 2016. Russia hacked Democrat emails, WikiLeaks published them, damaging Clinton's campaign. At the time, Trump maintained he had no links to Russia.
What do I have to get involved with Putin for? I have nothing to do with Putin. I've never spoken to him. I don't know anything about him other than he will respect me.
But then...
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
Donald Trump was talking about Clinton's personal emails, which were deleted from a private server, raising security concerns and questions over their contents. Trump maintains he was joking, but Mueller alleges that later that day, July 27, 2016, Russian agents working for the main intelligence directorate of the General Staff, or GRU, hacked the emails of Clinton campaign staff. It wasn't the first time. Clinton campaign chair John Podesta had his Gmail account hacked that March. Those emails were then sent to WikiLeaks, who published them during the final weeks of the campaign. Clinton seized on the possibility Donald Trump was doing Russia's bidding.
Putin, from everything I see, has no respect for this person.
Well, that's because he'd rather have a puppet as president of the United States.
No puppet.
And it's pretty clear.
You're the puppet.
And the media also wanted to know what was going on between Trump and Putin.
Donald Trump is gushing again over Vladimir Putin.
If he says great things about me, I'm going to say great things about him.
And since the election, Putin has admitted he wanted Trump to win.
Did you want President Trump to win the election? And did you direct any of your officials to help him do that?
Yes, I did, because he talked about bringing the U.S.-Russia relationship back to normal.
But what followed was anything but normal. After Trump's victory, before he was even sworn in, an unverified but astonishing claim, one the FBI took seriously enough to brief President Obama and President-elect Trump.
Russian operatives claimed to have compromising personal and financial information about Mr. Trump.
Was the incoming American president being blackmailed by Russia? Trump denied everything, including the Steele dossier's most salacious claim that he'd been filmed in a Moscow hotel with two sex workers urinating on a bed previously used by President Obama.
Does anyone really believe that story? I'm also very much of a germaphobe, by the way. Believe me.
Evidence of contacts between Trump associates and Russia continued to emerge.
Embattled National Security Advisor Michael Flynn resigned. In his letter to the president, he says he briefed the vice president and others with incomplete information regarding his phone calls with the Russian ambassador.
Sessions, as a senator, spoke with the Russian ambassador, but didn't disclose it at his confirmation hearing when asked about campaign contacts.
Frustrated at the shadow the Russia investigation had cast over his presidency, Donald Trump acted.
What a stunning decision from President Trump, firing FBI Director James Comey, only the second time in American history a president has taken that step.
And the president freely admitted his reason for sacking Jim Comey.
I said to myself, I said, you know, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story.
Then, in a barely plausible plot twist, days after firing Comey, the president spoke with senior Russian officials in the Oval Office.
Explaining the firing, Mr. Trump said, "I faced great pressure because of Russia. That's taken off."
Later on, Mueller would examine whether that amounted to obstruction of justice. He didn't make a conclusion. He passed that question on to Attorney General William Barr, who has exonerated the president. Comey's sacking, though, led the FBI to launch a counterintelligence probe in mid-May 2017. And then, within days, came this announcement.
The Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein has appointed former FBI Director Bob Mueller to now oversee the Russia probe and look at the possible connections between Trump campaign associates and Russia.
And so the special counsel probe began.
How did the old lady turn into Russian? What were you doing there?
But this wasn't a movie, and 34 indictments and 22 months later, President Trump is claiming complete vindication.
There was no collusion with Russia, the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. There was no collusion with Russia.
Democrats want to see the full Mueller report and are likely to pursue the questions of Trump's Russia ties through congressional committees. According to the president, the only contacts he had were about business. For years, he wanted to build the world's biggest apartment complex in Moscow. It was no secret.
It was during the early part of 16, and I guess even before that. It lasted a short period of time. I didn't do the project.
But according to Trump's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, who is a convicted perjurer, Trump's claim the Moscow deal ended in early 2016 is also a lie.
Mr. Trump knew of and directed the Trump-Moscow negotiations throughout the campaign and lied about it.
Donald Trump concedes even on election night. He thought he was going to lose, and so he kept looking for business opportunities, including Trump Tower Moscow, which needs Putin's approval. And he says there was nothing wrong with that.
I was running my business while I was campaigning. There was a good chance that I wouldn't have won, in which case I would have gone back into the business. And why should I lose lots of opportunities?
Was the president's hostility to the FBI and Mueller all because of concerns about his business practices, dodging taxes, hush money payments to women he denied having affairs with, and treating the Trump Foundation more like a petty cash account? Well, for now, President Trump's opponents aren't convinced that he's innocent. Ultimately, of course, history will be the judge. All right, everyone's doing it. Let's lawyer up for an opinion on what we've seen so far and what might still be made public. We're joined by Harry Litman. He is a former US Attorney and Deputy Attorney General, now based at the University of California. He's with us from San Francisco. Harry Litman, welcome to Planet America.
Thanks for having me, John.
So the Mueller investigation is over. Can the American people now draw a line and be confident there was no conspiracy with Russia from anyone associated with Donald Trump?
You know, I'm not sure how they can. Congress has received and the public has received this rather cryptic letter from the Attorney General citing or describing certain conclusions, but not the real reasoning behind them. On collusion in particular, Mueller seems to have given Trump and his circle a clean bill of health. People respect Mueller and think he was painstaking. On the other hand, they've been hearing for 22 months evidence that certainly includes incidents that seem to reek of a kind of conspiracy or agreement. For example, a meeting between the campaign chair Paul Manafort and Konstantin Kilimnik, where Manafort passes along proprietary polling data, then leaves from another exit. Things like that, they still need to understand why Mueller found no collusion. But the general notion that Russia was trying very hard to help the Trump campaign, but maybe the Trump campaign wasn't expressly joining in. I think people can understand that in the abstract, and it will help very much to understand it in the particular when the Mueller report is revealed.
Why is it so extraordinary for an independent counsel to sit on the fence on that question of obstruction and pass that to the Attorney General of the United States?
I mean, it's not just for an independent counsel. It's for any prosecutor in the Department of Justice. I've never heard of it. There are cases of certain magnitude where you know the ultimate decision may have to be approved by an attorney general, but it would be absolutely routine, without exception, that in those cases, you as the prosecutor who's worked the case, seen the witnesses, reviewed the evidence, would have a recommendation that you would advance. And I guess if it came to a perfectly 50-50 case, that's a case for declination. But yet he wouldn't do that. This aspect, John, has been the most, I would say, stunning. It's fair to call it stunning among the former prosecutors who serve as commentators back here in the States. We've never seen the like, and it really screams out to understand why Mueller would have done this, especially in a case of this magnitude. It is the soul of his mission to have come to closure one way or another, and that he didn't is absolutely extraordinary. It's possible that he came to a point where he thought it was so close that it should be served up to Congress for a political decision as part of impeachment hearings. And if that's so, and then the Attorney General turned around and basically countermanded that and made it a DOJ decision, that I think will be very troubling to a lot of people.
There are a couple of avenues that are still to be pursued in a number of matters that were raised in the Mueller inquiry. Congress and also the investigations that are continuing, particularly in the Southern District of New York and the New York Attorney General's Department. First, as to those outstanding cases that were transferred from Mueller to New York, what of those do you think are likely to proceed, and what sort of a legal risk do they pose to President Trump?
I mean, the risk is extreme. Everything short of actual criminal indictment, which I think we can now put off the table, but they concern all aspects of his business dealings and his life as a candidate. Before he was a candidate, during his candidacy, after, in the inauguration, and even into his presidency, those are all in play and quite serious. I think in particular, with the cooperation of Michael Cohen, his lawyer, but also of the chief financial officer of the Trump organization, who's been there forever and knows where all the bodies are buried. I think the risk to Trump of really exposing improprieties and illegalities by the Trump organization is pretty strong. Yes, so those will continue. There'll be a little bit of a sideshow to what had been this main event, but he is imperiled, as are members of his immediate family, for basically every aspect of his conduct starting from before he was a candidate.
As for the role of Congress from here, the House Judiciary Committee is wanting to have Attorney General Barr appear as soon as possible. They're also wanting to see the full Mueller report. What are we likely to see in the days and weeks ahead coming out of Capitol Hill?
Well, the immediate days and weeks ahead, Barr, in a little red part of his letter, said they're going to have to take a pause and examine whether there's material that was used in the grand jury, which normally would not be subject to disclosure, though sometimes is. But then you're going to have, I think, a battle will be joined. Barr has said, and I take him at his word, that he'll be wanting to be transparent to the extent permitted by law. But I think we'll find that extent, in his view and the view of the Department of Justice, is partial at best. So it will start a real tug of war with Congress, and it's hard to predict who wins those because there are different principles on both sides. And then the tangible potential impact of the Barr letter is just for some members of Congress, some members of the public, to make it seem like a fait accompli, and the vigorous oversight by Congress that they're entitled and obliged to do under the Constitution will feel like a bit of old hat. That I think is a concrete risk, because Congress has a lot to determine here. It does seem as if, my guess is that at the end of the day, the Department of Justice will be resisting a full disclosure of the Mueller report, though I also think at least it can't be hidden from history. We will one day, maybe not for a few years, see it in its entirety.
Harry Litman, good to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, John.
And it was while taking a victory lap over the no collusion finding this week that President Trump decided the time was right to revisit one of his unfulfilled promises, the scrapping of Obamacare, boldly declaring,
"The Republican Party will become the party of healthcare."
Well, the healthcare ball started rolling again when Trump's Justice Department announced this week its support for a lawsuit in Texas, which is seeking to throw out the Affordable Care Act in its entirety. The case is now with the Fifth Circuit of Appeals and may well end up in the US Supreme Court if it is ultimately ruled unconstitutional. The president has told Republicans he will need a replacement. For Democrats, though, it offers potentially a political gift because voters have warmed to Obamacare, particularly its requirement that insurance be provided to people with pre-existing conditions.
And this is just an act of cruelty. And not only that, it's a deception. All during the campaign, the Republicans said, we're for pre-existing condition benefit, we're for lowering cost of prescription drugs, we're all for these things.
Now, reportedly, some White House staff are tearing their hair out over Trump deciding to re-engage in this battle that he's lost a couple of times when he had congressional majorities. He's lost that in the House now, and exit polls after last year's midterms showed that healthcare was the top issue with around 40% of voters. It is a fight that Nancy Pelosi and her Democrats seem very keen to have, Chaz.
Yeah, and those who were concerned about healthcare last year vote for the Democrats by a 50-point margin. I should explain, though, the logic of this lawsuit. Their theory is that Obamacare was only found to be constitutional under the government's taxing power because it had a requirement that wealthy people either buy insurance or pay a penalty. But then in 2017, Congress zeroed out that penalty, so there wasn't a tax anymore. And they argue that that penalty is so important to Obamacare that as soon as you take it away, the whole thing becomes unconstitutional. The problem is that that rather curious line of argument might not appeal to the 20 million people whose health insurance would be taken away if Obamacare disappeared, which is why Pelosi is keen to talk about it. And also possibly why the Democrats coincidentally decided to roll out their own Obamacare policy a few days later, a policy which would increase the health insurance subsidies for the poor and would extend those subsidies to those who until now were too wealthy to receive them. That might be a slightly more popular policy, I think, than taking away 20 million people's health care.
You might be right.
But before we go to election world, some excellent news. It does appear that the Islamic State has been defeated, at least as far as land grabbing goes. President Trump has literally announced ISIS's defeat 13 times since December, but this time, America's Kurdish allies have backed him up. At their peak, Islamic State covered an area the size of Portugal, with loyalists launching over 100 terrorist attacks in dozens of countries. Now, there may be more attacks to come, but this is still great news. It allowed Trump to pull all 2,000 troops out of Syria and then backtrack and keep 400 there. And then backtrack again and leave 1,000 troops there. Look, we'll take what we can get. But then there is the less pleasant news about the war in Yemen, which has now gone on for 4 years despite Congress's best efforts recently. 80% of the population now require humanitarian assistance. There have been 110,000 reported cases of cholera just this year alone, 40,000 in the last 2 weeks, and 1,000 more children are reported as contracting cholera every single day. And how did the Saudis' allied forces celebrate 4 years of war? By doing what they do best, bombing a hospital, the coordinates of which they would certainly have been aware of. That's just one of 6,000 airstrikes on civilian targets that have occurred during this war. Happy birthday.
This incredibly long and expensive election campaign leading to the statistically likely re-election of President Trump 2020.
New York Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand formally declared her candidacy for President of the United States this week. And standing in front of a Trump hotel in downtown Manhattan, Senator Gillibrand took square aim at the president.
President Trump is tearing apart the moral fabric of this country. Our president is a coward.
But as we will see in a moment, Chaz, Kirsten Gillibrand has a lot of work to do if she wants to be the Democratic nominee. A new poll this week from Morning Consult has former Vice President Joe Biden extending his lead. Despite not yet confirming he's going to be a candidate, Biden is up 4 points to 35%, while Senator Bernie Sanders is down to 25%. Kamala Harris, though, has lost some support too. She's down 2 to 8%, equal with Beto O'Rourke, who hasn't actually gained any ground since announcing his campaign formally. Warren and Booker are steady, Klobuchar down 1. Mayor Pete Buttigieg is up 1, and all the other 1%ers are steady. But perhaps the more interesting poll this week, Chaz, came out of First to Vote Iowa. Emerson put Pete Buttigieg, the 37-year-old mayor of South Bend, Indiana, who's also the first openly gay Democrat to run for president, at 11%, up from 0 in the last poll, leapfrogging the rest of the field into third place. Kamala Harris is the biggest loser since the last Emerson poll in Iowa in February, down 8 points. Elizabeth Warren is down as well, 2. Cory Booker up 2. Beto O'Rourke is also losing a little ground after entering the race. What's happening with Beto? But, and it is a pretty big but, Chaz, this is a small sample poll, just 249 respondents. A margin of error, therefore, big, minus or plus 6.2. That being said, this is a poll that does track pretty closely to the gold standard of Iowa polls, the Des Moines Register poll, so it is not nothing.
Okay. Well, talking about polls, though, a lot of people are wondering how Trump's
complete and total exoneration
might affect his poll numbers. I think that we should give it another week or two to see, but judging from history, it might not make a massive difference. These are the Gallup averages for every president since polling began, and you can see that Trump's numbers are the lowest. But look at these yellow boxes. They show the range of half of each president's polls, and Trump has a smaller spread of poll results than any other president by some margin. So he never goes down. But after good news weeks like this, he doesn't go up either. He's frozen in amber, John, but will 42 to 44% be enough? We'll find out next year.
Big, beautiful world.
Now, you might have noticed that the stock market here has been going a little bit weird recently. Up and down and up and down and up. In fact, this week it's back to where it was at the beginning of last year. And one of those reasons for all this volatility is what they call the inverted yield curve.
Got the little handball out, Tex got it!
Hey, this is important. Don't switch off. This is what economics types have been talking about for the last 9 months. They just don't talk about it to you. Thank you. And it's the reason that they've been thinking a recession might be looming. See? Looming. So, first of all, what exactly is an inverted yield curve? Well, the Treasury sells a whole bunch of bonds to investors, and each of them pays a different rate of return. The yield curve is a graph that shows what those rates of return are, from the 1-month bonds all the way to the 30-year bonds. So, for example, a standard steep yield curve might look like this. When the government keeps money for longer, say for 10 years, there is more uncertainty about your investment, therefore more risk. So it's no surprise they're going to pay higher rates of return than for, say, a 1-year bond. But what if investors think that bad times are just around the corner in the next year or two? Well, then there's going to be more risk in the short term than the long term. So these short-term rates go up and you get a flatter yield curve. Eventually, if people are really worried, you might even get an inverted yield curve where the short-term securities pay more than the long-term securities. Oh my God, this is so boring.
No, it's not.
Whoa.
This is my life. And it literally is the difference between your precious Trump being re-elected or not. So stop running it down, get to the point.
How did you get in my wall? Fine. Look, there are many reasons that you might have a flat or inverted yield curve. Inflation might be low, for example, and people might expect it to stay that way. Generally speaking, though, a flat yield curve is seen as an indicator that interest rates are too high and therefore a recession may well be coming. See, that's the point. Look, let me show you what I mean. This is the difference between the 10-year yield rates and the 3-month yield rates over like 40 years. So for example, in 2011, say the 10-year bonds paid about 3% more than the 3-month bond rates. And the yellow regions here are where the 3-month bonds actually paid more than the 10-year bonds. That's why there's a negative difference. This here is where the yield curve inverted. Now, the last 7 recessions all occurred in these red zones, just after the inversions. 100% hit rate every time. Now, look where the graph is now. Yellow! The yield curve has just inverted again. Let's look at that in more detail. This is what the yield curve looked like a year ago. Very steep, very normal. 10-year yield rates, much higher than 3-month yield rates. Now, this is what that curve looked like a month ago. Getting very flat. And this is what the curve looked like on Tuesday. The 10-year yield rate is now slightly lower than the 3-month yield rate. And the 2-year rate, the 3-year rate, and the 5-year rate are all markedly lower than the 3-month rate. That there is an inverted curve, the 100% predictor of modern recessions. By the way, the reason why we're focusing on 10-year rates versus 3-month rates is because, according to this professor at least, that is the best part of the curve to use. And if there is one thing that I have learned from TV, it's that you always trust a professor. Although this professor also says that the curve needs to be inverted for about a quarter to provide a really strong signal when the recession is coming, so you should bear that in mind. Another thing to note is that according to Credit Suisse, the time between inversion and economic contraction, or recession, has ranged between 14 and 34 months. So that could mean that the recession could come after the next election. In fact, prior to the last 5 recessions, the stock market peaked on average 19 months after the yield curve inversion, obviously heading downwards fast after that. And then, of course, this is economics, so everyone disagrees with each other anyway. Ex-Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen, for example, says that an inverted yield curve is no longer a sign of a recession, whereas other analysts say that it suggests a 30% chance of recession within 12 months. And then some say that recessions can be self-fulfilling. So the very act of worrying about inverted yield curves can make people take actions that cause the recession in the first place. Look, let's face it, no one knows for sure. And economics, it's a bit of a crapshoot anyway, isn't it?
No, it's not. That was a terrible explanation. Look, just watch the business.
I just want you to know what economists are saying, okay? Because no other show is going to do that, are they?
Excuse me?
You're not.
Oh, we've been talking about this story for months, and a lot more accurately than you just did.
Big, beautiful world.
Well, we are just about out of time, but before we go, a quick chat about some of the fallout from the conclusion of the Mueller investigation. Here is President Trump's view of the media coverage.
The fake news media has lost tremendous credibility with its corrupt coverage of the illegal Democratic witch hunt of your all-time favorite duly elected president, me.
Strong words there, Chaz. Corrupt coverage, illegal Democratic witch hunt. Well, a couple of points I'd like to make on that quite quickly. To characterise this as a Democratic witch hunt kind of ignores the fact that it was instigated by Rod Rosenstein, the acting Attorney General of the United States.
Appointed by Trump.
Appointed by Trump, lifelong Republican. He appointed Robert Mueller, another lifelong Republican. And both sides pretty much agree unimpeachable as to his independence in all this. Yes, there are some Democrats in the Justice Department as a hangover from the Obama years, and indeed just career professionals in the FBI who are also Democrats. I would say there are probably more Republicans in the FBI than Democrats, just as a guess. Those are the kinds of people that tend to get involved with the FBI and the CIA and national security and so on. So to say that this is all just a confection now of the corrupt media ignores the fact that The special counsel wasn't appointed by CNN or Rachel Maddow on MSNBC. And there were valid questions to be asked because Jeff Sessions, Michael Flynn, a bunch of senior Trump advisors had lied publicly and to Congress about their contacts with Russia in 2016, at a time when Russia was actively interfering with the American election, trying to assist Donald Trump. Now, we now know, according to Robert Mueller, the two were not coordinating. There was no collusion. Well, terrific. But to now turn around and say the media for 22 months should not have been reporting on the fact that 5 Trump associates are now guilty. Some of them, like Paul Manafort, going to jail for 7+ years as a result. Now, none of that had to do with collusion in the end. It was to do with their dodgy financial dealings, but it was also potentially, if Paul Manafort was doing something with Russia, there's potentially your link to them.
And also, like you said, a lot of lying. People going to jail for lying.
Right. What were they lying about?
There's been a lot of lying the whole time.
Yep.
I feel like the witch hunt thing's been incredibly unfair. Robert Mueller is clearly very thorough, very professional. Just look at the results. He clearly hasn't had it in for Trump. So I think that's been very unfair. As far as the media goes, you know I haven't been a fan of the media's performance during the last 2 years, but I feel like the criticisms of the media have missed the point a bit. They've been outcome-based criticisms. People have said, no conspiracy, therefore the media has failed and everything the media said was wrong. No, you don't base it on the outcome of an investigation. You base your criticisms of the media based on their individual work. My problem with the media has been the individual articles. There have been at least 100 articles which have been retracted or corrected or have fallen apart from respectable outlets.
What was going on there? Because organisations like BuzzFeed, with less of a tradition of fact-checking and maybe journalistic rigour and discipline, they shook things up by putting the Steele dossier out there, but they also got some things wrong, like saying that Trump told Cohen to lie to Congress, therefore everyone's going, we should be impeached in January of this year.
There have been an incredibly large number of articles where you look at the corrections at the bottom a week later and they just keep on adding up. And I'm talking about the New York Times here and the Washington Post, respected outlets.
Is that because Mueller didn't leak and they were trying to fill column inches in this vacuum of information and trying to get whatever they could from any source that was prepared to talk to them on background? Or is it because they've got no money to have fact-checkers these days? They're not actually doing the kind of Woodward and Bernstein, gumshoe work.
I think it's a social media thing. People are just trying to get the story out first. It's just getting faster and faster and faster, and they're not taking the time to be thorough, which is a shame. So I would criticise the media, but about that, individual stories. I wouldn't be making generalisations of the entire media as if they're one unit, or saying, one newspaper is rubbish because of one report. No, you criticise the report, criticise the journalist, be specific. And don't generalise. Apart from Rachel Maddow, I don't like her show at all for the last 2 years.
But sycophants like Sean Hannity and Lou Dobbs are in no position to call anyone fake news.
That's true. Look, we've got to go, but let's continue this in the extra, okay? Because I've got a lot more to say about Mueller and about the media and about the FBI. We haven't touched
And Michael Avenatti and Jesse Smollett.
And Jesse Smollett. There's a lot to talk about. So see you on Facebook.
Okay.
See you there.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.